Hi, my name's Chris Scott and I'm here with Abbie Bennington. How are you, Abbie?
I'm fine, thank you, Chris.
Excellent. We're going to be talking about the white wines in Bordeaux today, but I'm a WSET certified educator, so is Abbie. We both teach WSET Level 3 courses for 30/50. You've got your own business, ABV Tastings, big on Instagram. I think that's the thing you want to push the most, isn't it?
I do. I'm also a Bordeaux tutor, that's why I'm here.
Yep, Bordeaux accredited tutor as well. You're the expert on Bordeaux in our team. So we're going to talk about white wines. And the three big grape varieties in Bordeaux, white grape varieties, are Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, and just a little bit of Muscadelle.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. The white wines of Bordeaux are a passion project for me, so I'm really excited about talking about these. Easy to remember, there's an even split between Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon.
Is that
in terms of
acreage?
plantings?
Planting.
In terms of planting, so 46% of each, and then 5% a Muscadelle.
Yeah, so Muscadelle is a bit player, but it does give that exotic spice to it, doesn't it? So,
it does, yeah.
So it's a nice little grape variety. Actual fact, this isn't a WST thing, but there's actually a load of other grape varieties that are allowed in Bordeaux, but they are very, very bit players.
Very small plantings, but they're important.
We don't talk about them too much to confuse people. So let's talk about it. So the main two, Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. Let's talk about it from an AC Bordeaux point of view first, because different regions have different blends and different reasons why they have the blend. So let's talk about AC Bordeaux or Entre-deux-Mers, for example.
So for Entre-deux-Mers, you're talking about predominantly Sauvignon Blanc in production. And Sauvignon Blanc is grown in bigger quantities in the Entre-deux-Mers, and this is because it's early ripening. It gives great wines which are easy to drink in their youth, some fruity finesse, freshness, vibrancy, very different to the New Zealand style of Sauvignon Blanc, but still very approachable in their youth.
Citrus and green fruits.
And green fruits, absolutely.
And also acidity.
High acidity, very high. So Sauvignon Blanc is an aromatic grape variety. It's known for its high acidity, and as you say, green fruits and that freshness, that those kind of green apples, gooseberries, lemon, those are kind of key characteristics of that variety.
But it doesn't have it's not as pronounced as, say, New Zealand Savvy. You know, New Zealand Savvies just blow your head off with the intensity.
That's cat's pee for me, but So there's no cat's pee in these wines, or very little anyway.
Blackcurrant leaf.
Yeah, blackcurrant leaf, very more delicate, more subtle, Chris, than the Kiwi ones, no offence. But also sharing the stage with Sauvignon Blanc is Semillon, and that's to say equal plantings and 46%. The thing about Semillon is it's a late ripener, so that's why it's very important not only for dessert wines, but also it has great aging potential as well. And it's often the higher quality wines will have the Sauvignon Blanc blended in with the Semillon.
I think aging is the big thing, isn't it? Because we often think that Sauvignon Blanc doesn't typically age, particularly if it's made in a protective method, keeping it away from oxygen. It holds on to these flavours that will develop quite ugly over a few years, whereas Semillon is a grape variety that ages very well. And if you're going to have a wine that ages, you need to have more Semillon in it than maybe Sauvignon Blanc. That's the way I think about it anyway.
No, you're absolutely right. So Sauvignon Blanc is a grape variety that doesn't naturally dispose itself to aging. And as I say, the Semillon is key for that in terms of the blend.
Yep. Okay, so we talked about Entre-deux-Mers and AC Bordeaux, and we said that Sauvignon Blanc tends to dominate it. Probably the most exciting white wines in Bordeaux is probably from Pessac-Leognan or Graves. Certainly, I think anyway. Because let's talk about the whites of Pessac-Leognan, because here they're making them a little bit different. They're being they're more Semillon, and they've also got some oak.
They have got some oak. So Pessac-Leognan, these wines have been exposed to some oak. Also, we should probably mention that in some of these areas you've got the stones as well. So it's a warmer area. It's able to ripen some of those grapes and give that extra ripening as well, especially as you're creeping inland. Oak is king in terms of the white varietals, in terms of the white blends, and often these wines have spent significant periods in oak before being bottled.
Yeah, then oak fermented. And if you're thinking about winemaking, I think if you're making a Sauvignon Blanc Bordeaux or an Entre-deux-Mers Bordeaux dominated by Sauvignon Blanc, you're going to go through the normal processes of harvesting, sorting if it's more premium. The more premium, the more sorting you're going to do. Then you're going to do a cool fermentation in stainless steel, typically, no oak, and then bottling. It's a nice, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc producers often call Sauvignon Blanc a cash cow because you turn it around in the winery very quickly. There's no oak influence that costs money, any of that type of thing. So it's a very quick, fast buck, if you like. Whereas once you get into Pessac-Leognan and you're starting to use oak aging, you're still going to have to do good sorting. You're still going to have to press and crush, but you might have less protective winemaking techniques. So you might let the wines be exposed to a little bit of oxygen during the pressing, maybe use a basket press as opposed to a bladder press, perhaps. And that exposure to oxygen before fermentation means you lose some of the fruit flavors, but the wines become much more stable to oxygen later on. So they become much better for aging at a later date. So you see that a little bit, basket presses become more important in a wine for aging than, whereas if you're looking for fruit flavors, no real aging potential.
If you want to try and control and harness those aromatics, the high aromatics, the more delicate ones, then you do want to keep it away from oxygen. But these wines coming from Pessac-Leognan have been exposed, as you say, very gently through the winemaking process to a little bit of oxygen, which I'm afraid does depress the aromatics, but does improve its stability for aging.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of fermentation temperature, cooler fermentation, the more you're going to hold on to the aromatics. Warmer fermentation, the less you're going to hold on to the aromatics, which is why barrel fermented wines sometimes, because you don't have as much control over the fermentation temperature in a barrel, an oak barrel, than you will in a stainless steel tank with cooling. You often use stainless steel if you want to hold on to those. So you've AC Bordeaux, where you're just going for a very simple fruity style of wine. You're going to be fermenting maybe at a lower temperature than maybe Semillon. I'm not sure about that, actually.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit warmer with Semillon, certainly. Yeah.
Okay. So then these wines we made separately. So you will have all your Sauvignon Blanc fermented, all your Semillon fermented, and then you've got the big thing of blending. And if you're in Pessac-Leognan, you'll blend before or after barrel aging?
I think it's after, actually. But obviously it depends on the producer. I'm sure there is some post-fermentation sort of melding of flavours within barrel, depending on who you are and where you are. But yeah, it's, as you say, up until that point, it's kept separate.
Okay. And like red wines, you've got different barrels. You're probably looking for different types of barrels for white wine than you would for red wines, different toast levels, that sort of thing. But you've got your barrels, you age them in barrels, and then you blend them.
Yes.
Bottle them.
Blend them and send them off, but it needs obviously a little bit of time to rest in bottle and then sent off. Yep.
Don't forget tartric stability. I always forget about that, tartric stabilization. Yeah. And that's one of the problems you get, particularly for white wines, because you put them into a fridge and they can cool down and there's tartric crystals. Tartric's just an acid. And what will happen is they can form crystals, particularly if you leave it in a fridge or the wine bottle gets really cold. And you'll see at the bottom of wine. Sometimes I see it in the bottom of corks. Actually, you see
yes, you can see the little crystals.
Yeah.
Known as wine diamonds.
Yes.
They freak people out, don't they? Because people, and I've seen it actually mainly seen it in rosés. So these little tartaric crystals form, and you often see them, as you say, either at the bottom of the cork or at the bottom of the bottle. And when you pour it out, people get very scared because they think they've got little broken bits of glass. They're actually completely harmless. But from a consumer's point of view, they can be quite alarming.
The way to manage it is you drop the temperature of the wine, you hold it, and what happens is all those tartric crystals form at that point. So when you filter the wine and bottle it, you don't have them going through, and then they become stable for tartric.
Absolutely.
You do that for white and red wines as well, and then filtering, bottling, sterile bottling often. Cool. Let's talk about the sweet wines, because now we're still in Grave. But now we're in Sauternes and we're in Pessac as well. And let's just not muck around here. Pessac is a sub-region of Sauternes. You can get a wine labelled as Pessac, but if you're in Pessac, you can actually call it Sauternes as well.
Yes. So Sauternes, one of the great wines of the world. These wines are known for micro quantities, macro prices. Basically, They tend to be Semillon and very much more feature in the blend. So Semillon, as I said, is a late ripening grape. It can age. It ripens right into the autumn, and if you've got the right conditions, Semillon. In these kind of misty mornings, this mold, this rot known as noble rot or botrytis cinerea penetrates the grape. It's literally sends its kind of little tubulars into the grape. The water leaches out of the grape, and that concentrates the acids, the sugar, and the flavour within the resulting grape. And it shrivels up. It just looks like a little sultana, really. And then those grapes, when they are just in that little sultanery state, get hand-picked, and taken off to the winery. And this isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that happens in many stages. So if you are a vineyard owner or a worker, you're going to have to pass through the vineyard several times, picking off those little berries, just the right point, and then taking them back. So this is not only hugely labour intensive, but extremely expensive to do.
And also, Semillon, thin-skinned grape variety, where Sauvignon Blanc is quite thick, which means that the molds can pierce the skins for Semillon, whereas it's a lot harder for Sauvignon Blanc because of the thicker skin. So what you see in the blend is you'll get the botrytis flavours from the Semillon, but then the Sauvignon Blanc gives you the acidity, because let's face it, if you have a wine that's just all about the sweetness, it becomes very cloying and it's not balanced. If you want to have a wine that's very sweet, the wine also has to have a lot of acidity to balance out that sweetness. In which case, Sauvignon Blanc gives you the acidity, Semillon gives you the sweetness through the botrytis.
Absolutely. And I always describe it to students as being like, yes, it's very sweet. These wines are incredibly sweet. But unlike, say, a squash, an undiluted squash, which is just sort of sugar and a little bit, tiny bit of fake acid popped in there, with these wines, because you have that acidity, yes, you have the sweetness, but that acidity still has to be pretty high, otherwise you just wouldn't be able to drink it. And that's the beauty of these wines.
And what is the flavours you'd get from botrytis?
So there are a few flavours, as I say, unlike a late harvest grape, which is just extra hang time, where you get the concentrated sugars, the botrytis imparts these additional aromas and flavours, and they include rye bread.
That's not an official WSET. But I think it tastes of rye bread.
Yes, definitely rye bread, marmalade, and I think ginger, sort of like the syrup of ginger. You know, get them at Christmas, the ginger balls that are in syrup. Those kind of aromas and flavours.
Dried apricots as well.
Dried apricots, of course.
Now, I always think you quite often in these sweet wines, you get a little gingery note, and it catches you on the back of your throat. It's not actually ginger; it's volatile acidity. And because of the really high levels of sugar in the wines, the yeast struggles to ferment and it produces high levels of volatile acidity. And that can give an aromatic lift to the wine, but it also sometimes catches you on the back of the throat when you're drinking some of these sweet wines. That's quite
a skill to be able to tell the difference between those, but absolutely right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing that you get in Sauternes and Pessac is not every year is perfect for botrytis. You need specific conditions. And sometimes what you get instead of botrytis, particularly on the cheaper wines that aren't in the best spots in Sauternes and Pessac, is you get a thing called passerelage. And passerelage is where the grapes are on the vine. And what happens is, as the season progresses, it's a bit like an apple. As the season progresses, the apples are ripe. The apple tree doesn't want to invest any more energy in the apple. So what it has is the stem gets thinner and thinner and thinner. And eventually the stem gets so thin that the apple falls off the tree. Well, grapes do the same thing. As the grapes are ripening, the stem gets thinner and thinner and thinner. Less water and nutrients flow into the grapes, but you're still getting evaporation through the skins. So what you find with passerelage is you get the concentration of the sugars, not as much as with botrytis. You still get the concentrations. You just don't get those botrytis flavours that you get. So
yes, the natural drying on the passerelage, the translation, the drying on the vine.
And that's different to botrytis because you don't get the same concentration and you don't get the flavours. But in a bad year, you can still make a sweet wine that's quite nice.
Oh, absolutely. And there are fluctuations from year to year. So there are some years which are better for botrytis than others. It is a natural phenomenon. There are no guarantees. So some years are better than others. But also we need to remember this misty mornings for this mold to creep into the vineyard. But you do need those dry, sunny afternoons. Otherwise, the grapes would just rot away, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And the other thing is botrytis. It's the same as grey rot. It's exactly the same thing. The difference is we call it grey rot if the grapes aren't physiologically ripe. That is, what happens is grey rot will stop the flavour development and in red wines tannins development if it's an underripe grape. And so we call it grey rot if the grapes are not physiologically flavour ripe. Whereas we call it botrytis if they're flavour ripe. And what happens is it'll stop the flavour ripeness of the grapes, but then you'll get it, because the grapes are really ripe, you're then getting that concentration as well. So that's the big difference between grey rot and botrytis. Same thing, just different times of the growing cycle.
And it's game over. If you've got grey rot, that's it. You know, in the vineyard, you've lost your grapes. You can't produce wine from them.
Oh no, I judge at some of the big wine competitions. You'll be surprised how much grey rot you see in some of those wines. They still make wine out of them. They can be pretty dodgy. From a wine making point of view with sweet wines, you've got your concentrated Semillons, you've got your Sauvignon Blancs for the acidity, a little bit of Muscadelle. You make the wines, cool fermentation, stainless steel. Is it stainless steel or is it barrel femme?
Usually, yeah, stainless steel.
But most of the good Sauternes is aged in barrel afterwards.
Yes, we'll see some oak influence in there, and that will add to the overall complexity of the wine.
I often see butterscotch as a flavour.
Butterscotch, yes. I mean that's a good example actually, where if you're trying to pinpoint how the oak expresses itself in these wines, then butterscotch is probably the best way to describe it. Don't forget that Muscadelle, we always think because it's only sort of 5% of plantings, it's not much. It does add this aromatic lift to the wines. It does add a little kind of delicate complexity, and is really important in the overall blend.
Excellent. All right then. I think that'll do on white grape varieties. Cheers. Good drinking.